Hey guys, Jimmy here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm really excited because we're going to do something a little different. I've got this massive whole chuck roll sitting in front of me, and we're going to break this thing down completely. Now you might be looking at this and thinking, why would I want to deal with a whole chuck roll? Here's the thing. When you buy this whole, you're paying maybe $4 to $5 a pound. When you buy these same cuts at the grocery store already broken down, you're paying anywhere from $8 to $15 a pound depending on the cut. So right off the bat, you're saving a ton of money. But it's not just about the money. When you break this down yourself, you get cuts you literally cannot find in a regular grocery store. We're talking Denver steaks, Sierra steaks, beautiful chuck eye steaks that rival a ribeye. Plus, you get to control the trim, the thickness of your steaks, everything. You're basically becoming your own butcher. What you'll need to get started, I've got my flexible boning knife here for the intricate work, and then I've got this larger chef's knife. I like this bigger one because it lets me cut in one long, smooth motion when I'm actually cutting steaks. The boning knife is going to be your best friend for separating muscles. All right, let's dive in. So let's talk about what we're looking at here. This is a whole chuck roll. In the grocery store, you typically see sections of this sold as chuck roast or pot roast. It's that classic braising cut. But here's what most people don't realize. Inside this one piece, there are multiple distinct muscles, and each one has its own characteristics, its own texture, its own best use. The chuck sits right behind the rib section on the cow. So on one end here, this is where the ribeye ends and the chuck begins. That's important because it means we've got some really well-marbled, tender meat on that end. As we move further down, the muscles work a little harder, they're a little leaner, but they're still incredibly flavorful. Our goal today is to separate these muscles, clean them up, and turn them into individual cuts. Some are going to be steaks, some will be roasts, and whatever trim we have left over becomes stew meat or ground beef if you've got a grinder. All right, first thing I'm going after is the chuck eye. Now I'm going to start by separating out this muscle right here. You can see all that beautiful marbling running through it. That's what we're looking for. This is the same muscle that was part of the ribeye, so you know it's going to be tender and delicious. What I'm doing here is using just the tip of my boning knife to help separate this piece. And here's an important technique. I don't want to go in too deep because if I do, I'll start cutting into some of the other muscles that I want to keep intact. Think of your knife as a guide more than a cutting tool at this stage. You're just persuading the muscles to separate. See how I'm using my hands a lot? I'm pulling and separating the muscles manually. This is actually the best way to do it because you can feel where the natural seams are. When you use your knife too much, you risk cutting through muscles instead of between them. Your hands tell you where things want to come apart. Now I'm just using a little bit of my knife, just the smallest part. You don't need to use your whole blade here. You're literally just using it to cut through the connective tissue that's holding these muscles together. It should almost feel like you're peeling something rather than cutting it. As I roll this out, you can see this whole piece is going to end up as a really nice roast. Look at that marbling throughout. This is prime braising territory, but we'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay, so now we get to one of my absolute favorite steaks in the entire cow, the chuck eye steak. A lot of people call this the poor man's ribeye, and honestly, that name doesn't do it justice. Yes, it's significantly cheaper than a ribeye, but the flavor and tenderness are right there. Here's why. This is literally where the ribeye ends and the chuck begins. If you were to keep cutting ribeyes, this would be the next 2 or 3 steaks. The ribeye would continue into here and stop, and then this is where the chuck begins. So you're getting that same muscle, that same marbling, just technically in a different primal cut. Now here's the thing about chuck eye steaks. You can realistically only get 2 to 3 steaks out of this section. After that, the muscle starts to change. So these are kind of special. I like to cut them thick, about 1.5 inches, because this is a steak you want to treat like a ribeye. You want to get a good sear on it, maybe cook it to medium rare, let it rest. It's going to be incredible. I'm cutting these nice and thick. See how much marbling is running through here? That's going to render as it cooks and keep everything juicy and flavorful. This is legitimately one of the best steaks you can get, and most people have never even heard of it. Now look at this part of the chuck eye. See how it starts to thin out? Gets a little more narrow and you start to lose that muscle definition. This is what I was talking about. Realistically, you're not going to get as good of a steak out of this section. The muscle structure just changes, but this still makes an excellent roast. All right, now I'm going to dive back into the rest of this. Out of this section, we're going to get some really incredible steaks that you almost never see in grocery stores. And whatever trim I have left over, I'll save for stew meat. If you've got a grinder or a food processor, you could also use it for ground beef, which is fantastic. Now, what I'm looking for here is this muscle. This is called the serratus ventralis, which is where the Denver steak comes from. The Denver is this amazing, well-marbled steak that's only been recognized as its own cut since around 2009. Before that, this whole section just got ground up or used for roasts. Somebody finally figured out, wait, if we separate this muscle, it's actually an incredible steak. And they were right. But before we get to the Denver, there's another cut that sits right on top of it that you need to know about, the Sierra steak. See this layer of fat right here? And then you can see some meat underneath it with some silver skin kind of shining on top. That's the Sierra. I need to trim off that top layer first before I can get down to the Denver below. I'm just gradually shaving off that top layer of fat and trim. You want to be patient here. If you try to rush it, you'll cut too deep and take too much meat with the fat. Just skim along the surface, and as I do this, you can start to see the steak underneath. Look at that. It's got this shape similar to a flank steak. Long grain running the length of it, nice and lean, but still flavorful. Now I'm going to get underneath it. Again, I like to use my hands a little bit to start the separation. When you're just using your knife, you can start cutting into things you don't want to. But if you use your hands, you can feel where that natural seam is. See how I'm pulling? I'm releasing the tension between the muscles, and I'm just barely cutting into it with the knife. The meat kind of tells you where it wants to separate. There we go. That's your Sierra steak. Now I'm just going to trim this up a little more, get any excess fat and silver skin off. I want to give it a uniform shape so it cooks evenly. This is a cut you can use very much like a flank steak or a flat iron. The grain runs with the length of it, so what you do is grill this, maybe marinate it for a few hours first, cook it to medium rare, let it rest, and then slice it thin against the grain. It's perfect for fajitas, steak salads, or just serving to a crowd as sliced steak. Really versatile, really flavorful. All right, now we get into the Denvers themselves. Now I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to require quite a bit of trimming. There's a thick layer of fat between the chuck eye, the Sierra, and then the Denver underneath. This is why most butchers just don't bother with these cuts. It's easier to just grind everything or sell it as roasts, but trust me, it's worth the effort. As I'm creating this trim pile, I want some lean meat. There's a good amount of fat here, so some of that fat I'm going to discard. But some of the lean pieces I'll keep because this makes excellent stew meat. I want my ratio to be appropriate. If I was going to grind this, I don't want it 50-50 fat to lean. I want it like 70-30 or 80-20. That's going to give you a much better texture and flavor. Here's another good piece for the trim pile. I'm just whittling this down, trying to expose any lean meat underneath that layer of fat. And as I get there, I can really start to see the muscle structure. See how it kind of fans out? You can see the main sections here, and then it starts to angle this way. This whole section is where your Denvers are going to come from. Now this part here, you could use this, but I'm saving it for some nice lean stew meat. There's almost kind of a line right through here. See that? I like to cut right by that line, go down, and then this whole part makes great stew meat. It's got some marbling, but it's a little bit leaner, so it's perfect for beef bourguignon or just a regular beef stew. Now you've got options with the Denver. You can cut long strips if you want, kind of like a steak fry shape. But what I like to do is take this back piece, square it off, and again, save that trim for stew meat or ground beef. And then I'll start at the small section and cut them about 3/4 to an inch thick. Here's why thickness matters. Too thick and these might be a little tough. The Denver is tender, but it's not like a fillet, but in that 3/4 to an inch range. You get a nice steak that's got great texture. Anything thinner and you risk overcooking it. Anything thicker and it can be a bit chewy. See those white streaks running through? That's what makes this cut so special. This is super flavorful, well marbled, and if you've never had a Denver steak, you're missing out. It's got this rich, beefy flavor that's almost closer to a New York strip than anything else in the chuck. You season these simply, salt, pepper, maybe some garlic, grill them over high heat, get a nice crust, cook to medium rare or medium, and they're absolutely incredible. There's our first Denver. I'll probably cut 1 or 2 more, and then I'll take the remaining piece, split it in half, and cut more steaks from there. Out of this one chuck roll, you're going to get maybe 6 to 8 Denver steaks depending on thickness. All right, let's keep moving. I've still got more meat to break down here. Once I've got all my Denvers cut, I'm going to look at what's left. There's usually a few smaller muscles and pieces that don't quite make full steaks, and all of that becomes premium stew meat. The key with stew meat is consistent sizing. If you've got pieces that are all different sizes, some are going to be overcooked and dry while others are still tough. So take your time, cut them into similar size chunks, and you'll be much happier with the final result. All right, so there you have it. From one whole chuck roll, look at everything we got. We've got all this stew meat. I've probably got 2 to 3 pounds here. That's multiple meals right there. And then we've got these incredible steaks, the Denver steaks. Look at that marbling. Great for grilling, probably my favorite cut from the chuck. The Sierra steak, which is fantastic sliced thin for fajitas or salads, and then the chuck eye steaks, which honestly might be the best value in beef. These rival a ribeye at a fraction of the cost. All of this from one piece of meat. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe.